It is specifically designed instruction provided at no cost to parents to meet unique needs of a child with a disability, including adapting content, teaching methodology, and delivery instruction to meet the appropriate needs of each child. Sometimes you also hear FAPE, which is another acronym, just free and appropriate public education that coincides with special education. So special education broadly identifies academic, physical, and cognitive and social emotional instruction offered to children who are faced with one or more disabilities. The range of special education support will vary based on need and educational levels. There are 4 steps to qualifying for special education, and generally there's a pre-referral. This can come from the school team. This can come from the parents just requesting an evaluation for special education services. The evaluation will meet to discuss what the needs are, what the present levels are, and decide whether or not a full evaluation would need to take place. After that, we would meet to determine the eligibility of the student, and if that student does meet the eligibility criteria for one or more disabilities, we would develop an IEP, an individual education program. And then from there, we would have supports in place. Here's a list of the qualifications for special education services. I'm not going to read them all. The ones that you'll see mostly are specific learning disability, speech and language impairment, other health impairment, which is coupled with a medical diagnosis, and this will include a lot of our students with ADHD, and then ASD, autism spectrum disorder. We do have students with all of these within the district. I know that there were a lot of questions around how to support students with ASD and with ADHD, so I'm going to take some time to play some short videos just in explanation.
Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a neurodevelopmental condition that affects how a person communicates, interacts with others, and experiences the world. ASD affects approximately 1 in 36 children in the United States, according to the CDC. But what is it exactly? Autism is referred to as a spectrum disorder because it can affect people in different ways and to different degrees. Some people with autism benefit from significant support with their daily activities and social interactions. Others are independent and do well in many areas of life, but may struggle socially. The symptoms of autism can vary, but some common signs include difficulty with social interactions, limited eye contact, difficulty in nonverbal communication, and sensory sensitivities, such as when exposed to intense light or sounds. Some people with autism may have intense interests or specific narrow interests, may engage in repetitive movements or actions, such as lining up toys or flipping objects, and some may struggle with changes to the routines or environments. Autism is typically diagnosed in early childhood, but some people may not receive a diagnosis until later in life. Options are available to help with managing challenges. This may include working with school staff and healthcare professionals. Speech therapists can help with critical skills for learning and self-expression, and occupational therapists can help children learn new skills. Behavioral therapies can help with specific symptoms. Psychiatrists can do a complete mental and physical assessment and can help manage symptoms. While no medications are approved to treat the core symptoms, medication and psychotherapy may be helpful to treat co-occurring conditions. It is important to recognize that autism is a spectrum disorder and that people with autism can experience a range of abilities and difficulties. There is no single experience of autism. With understanding and acceptance of the unique experiences of each individual with autism, and with accommodations and support, we can create a more inclusive society for everyone. Let's work together to make that world a reality. For more information about diagnosis and treatment, please visit www.psychiatry.org. Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD,
An estimated 8.4% of children and 2.5% of adults experience attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD. Understanding the symptoms might be harder in adults than in children, as most ADHD symptoms are behaviors that everyone struggles with once in a while, like forgetting to pay the bills, spacing out during a conversation, or missing school or work deadlines. However, in ADHD, these are more constant and disruptive. Inattention, impulsivity, and sometimes hyperactivity are key symptoms. These symptoms usually occur together. There are three major types of ADHD: hyperactive or impulsive, inattentive, and combined. The hyperactive impulsive type is the least common. The inattentive type involves mainly inattention and distractibility. The combined type is the most common and is a mixture of all the symptoms. Without proper diagnosis and treatment, ADHD can lead to chronic fatigue, depression, emotional outbursts, or performance issues at work or school. ADHD may look different from one person to the next. So, understanding possible indicators and negative effects of ADHD is a key step toward receiving necessary support and starting the recovery journey. Types of treatment include therapy, medication, or a combination of both. The goal of treatment is to improve symptoms and to restore functioning and performance at home and work or school. If you suspect that you or someone you know has ADHD, talk with a healthcare provider who will perform an evaluation and discuss treatment options. For more information about diagnosis and treatment throughout the lifespan, please visit www.psychiatry.org. An estimated 8.4% of children and
Okay, thank you for watching. I hope that provides some information, and I will be happy to answer any specific questions you have about that in a little bit. When a student qualifies for special education, they get an individualized education program. And so this is developed by the entire team. It's the family, teachers, supporting staff, sometimes building administration. The team will meet every year to evaluate the IEP and plan for another IEP for the next year. And every 3 years, we'll meet to do a complete reevaluation to determine if the student continues to qualify for special education services. It is a legally binding document and is sort of monitored through the Office of Civil Rights in America. The IEP will clarify services a student will receive and will have justification for why those services are necessary. So again, this is just through a comprehensive evaluation process. And the IEP includes the placement. Some students are placed in like a learning center. Some students only have speech and language services. In Portland, we still have students who attend focus classrooms, a self-contained room for like intensive skills or social emotional supports. They will have academic and or behavioral goals and accommodations and modifications that are necessary to support the student in being successful. For your purposes, how do we support our learners with IEPs and 504s? And this comes through accommodations. After school or before school wouldn't be responsible for providing the special education services, but would be responsible for knowing what the accommodations are and what supports that are necessary to help our students to be successful. And the way to look at accommodations is primarily in like helping students to manage the cognitive load that they have to do. Like these students are really capable, but sometimes they just need to do more work than everyone else. So how do we maximize their work towards being successful, towards what we want them to do, and just help them sort of manage that. We always want to maintain high expectations. There's something called Universal Design for Learning, and that's something that the district is adopting and working to make sure that we're training everyone on, and it's just making sure we're using best practices, like representing information in multiple formats and media. So like giving directions verbally, having them written on a board, or using some like pictorial cues to show what the schedule is going to be. Providing multiple pathways for students, actions and expressions. I think, just like thinking about what are the different ways that a student can be successful, and how can we play into their skills or the things that they're working on in being able to participate, and providing multiple ways to engage students' interests and motivation. And so being really flexible with how we're presenting information, what kind of projects we might be doing. There are plenty of evidence-based practices that we want to make sure that we're using. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we want to be scientific with, if we're trying something, we know that it works and that we can be consistent with it. I think a lot of times, like, we tap into our creativity and we'll kind of try something new all of the time, and we really want to make sure that we can set up something that's consistent for these students. We want to target instruction and use formative indicators of student performance, just basically like knowing like where the student's at and where we want them to get. And so that in our work with them, we can sort of tell how much progress they're making. And just realizing that individuals with processing and communication disabilities know right from wrong. I think just making sure we're not making some assumptions about the capacity and capability of our students. Also, it's crucial when we're working with our students that we're focused on like being person-centered, trauma-informed, and culturally responsive, and understanding how all these things work together to influence the student's experience. And like wondering how we can develop our ability to consider and adapt our instruction, communication based on different factors that contribute to our students' lived experience. Things like age, culture, gender identity, cognitive ability, race, previous life experiences. Some of these things we may not be privy to, but we do want to take those into consideration when we're understanding more about our students' experience. And particularly if after school, the student's been in school for 7.5 hours, and sometimes they're there before school, just like understanding what they've gone through that day and what the school experience has been like when we're working with them after hours. Some universal tools, these are things that can be kind of accessible to everyone, but might also show up as accommodations on an IEP. And I'm just go through these really quickly. Just for instruction, like visual schedules, routines, activities, and tasks. Like for a lot of students, it's just really helpful for them to be able to see and pinpoint when a transition is going to be, like how long they're going to be doing something, what to expect that's coming up, when things end, and it can provide some security for them. Visual or virtual timer reminders. A lot of kids can be satiated by just having access to a timer. They're doing something for 5 minutes. It helps them know that it's going to end. I think sometimes when things can feel ambiguous to a student, it can really trigger some feelings. Warnings before transitions, using first, then language. So like, first we're going to take off our shoes, then we're going to sit on the carpet, or first we're going to get our materials, then we're going to sit down, just being as explicit with instructions as we can. Positive behavior reinforcement. The different schools of thought. Some people say in your classroom you should have like 7 positives to 1 negative communication with students. I've heard 4 and 1. I think the updated is 7 to 1. But just make sure we're really acknowledging the positive choices and the productive choices that our students are making, and then spending less time focusing on the things students need to correct. Always checking for understanding, particularly after giving instructions, just immediately after. Try to avoid using yes, no questions. It's really easy to say, yes, I understand. Or like you can have a student restate, or like, what can you tell me about what we're doing next? Just as much pre-warning as you can get, especially if like the routine is going to be changed. That students can be really adaptive, but if it's a surprise or it sneaks up on them, it can be really hard. Obtaining attention prior to speaking, like really getting into your call and response, maybe doing something physical with the call and response, and just like trying to be as consistent as possible with that. It carries so much power, but if we do it and we get like 20% participation and we move on, it loses all its power. And peer buddies. And this is something in special education we really try to maximize. These kids are going to learn more from their peers than they will ever learn from their teachers. So how are we using those relationships to help them be successful in our space? In terms of curriculum, chunking, and this is just like how much information are we presenting to them at one time. But I use the example of like magazine articles, really small text, a lot of columns, and then you have to go to another page to finish it. And that just feels overwhelming to me when I pick up a magazine. But if I have like a large text on an 8x11 page, like I'll read, 400, 500 pages of it, no problem. So like how much information we're giving them at one time to not overwhelm them, or just to like ensure that they can be successful. A lot of our students are going to have difficulty with reading. And if we give them a page to read, it can be really overwhelming. If we give them a paragraph that's surrounded by a little box, it can be like, oh, it's manageable. I can do this. Checklists and breaking tasks down. This is really, really powerful for students who struggle. It's just like a list of things they can do and checking them off as they go. That's really a positive way to do like behavior reinforcement as well. And then like having alternative work. We want to make sure that we prepare our students to be successful. So if they don't read very well and you're doing a reading activity, reading it aloud for them, pairing them with somebody who can read it to them, and just giving them a chance to be able to interact with the information. In the environment, like having a break space and then being really mindful about like what a break means. We don't want a student to take breaks while we're giving instructions, because then they're not going to be able to participate. So being mindful of what that means for you and your space. Using a timer, visual timers are great. Just whatever you can use. A flexible, alternative, and differentiated seating. And the next one, strategic seating and assignment. Sometimes putting them in the front, sometimes putting them close to the teacher, sometimes putting them close to a door so that they can excuse themselves if they need to, next to a friend. Being mindful of sensory stuff, like what is the lighting, like what's the noise level, what can you influence? Providing, like having noise canceling headphones. This is a pretty popular tool that we use. You can ask, teachers if you have access to them. If you don't, sensory tools like fidgets. A lot of education needs to be done with fidgets to ensure that they're not treating it like a toy, but it can be something that's really helpful for our students. And then FN systems and amplification. Can our students hear? Do they need something that allows them to like have better access to the auditory part of the lesson? Some of the more individualized accommodations that we have, like a lot of students will have a behavior support plan, and this is where we have a pretty comprehensive plan of like what the student has certain behaviors. We look at like what triggers the behavior, what skills they might need to learn in order to change the behavior, and then what we do when the behavior happens again. This could be elopement, hitting, biting, refusing to do work. And I would say just like the most important thing when working with students with behaviors is that we're focused on what the intervention is when they're doing something. We can have lists, miles long of what the students are doing. And that can be like good information, but it doesn't mean much. The thing that really means something is like, how are we responding to the student when they do it, and is that working? Like, what language are we using? What options are we providing? Are we aware of like things that might set that student off and trying to influence those things? Safety plans is not through the IEP process. It's something that usually lives within the school, but this might be something for nursing or a student eloping, but it's just kind of like make sure that everyone is aware that like something dangerous might happen, and this is how we respond in those situations. And then like some students have adult supports in the IEPs that would have access to a paraprofessional, and this is available in the after school. It's provided under Section 504, and it's not provided through special education, but it is something that if you have access to the IEPs and you notice it, I would speak with the school administration to ensure that the student is provided with the services they're guaranteed. I've seen this for students who like needed support in an after-school drama club, and sometimes we don't know that we can advocate for that, but it is really important, and it's just really helpful to have another adult in the room when we've deemed that necessary. So how do we prepare for our students? We need to make sure that we're constantly teaching and reinforcing our norms and expectations. We cannot assume that students know better or they are choosing not to follow directions. I think we can get into a place, particularly with some of the older kids, the middle school and high school kids, think that they're purposefully like pushing our buttons, breaking the rules. I think it's always a teaching opportunity, and always just make sure like if the student's not respecting the space, they might not know what respect means. They might not know why respect is important or what it feels like when you're in a space where you're respected. And so always looking for opportunities to reinforce those and, say things in a new way if they don't seem to be getting it the other way. Reinforcing students' good decisions is paramount in creating positive classroom culture. Using specific praise ensures the students can identify what they are doing that elicits positive reinforcement. I think, good job is nice, but like good job for completing this and turning it in, or just being like really specific with what they did is just a lot more meaningful when we're working with students. Knowing that each student has a different access point into what we were teaching, and if we're not considerate of what those access points are, like we can just exclude them from everything that we're doing. I think a lot of students, if they can't read something and it's reading heavy, like we need to figure out a way for them to be able to participate and use their knowledge in order to be a part of the community and share. Because if we don't do that, then they're kind of just reinforcing that they don't belong or they're not welcome in our space. And so just always like beforehand, like how is this student gonna participate? Like what does it look like? What are ways we can be flexible in what that participation looks like? As much as possible, we wanna make sure that we're providing like routine and structure for our students, practicing things again and again, like having those rituals that we do, like the morning or the check-in that you do, and just being consistent with those things. For a lot of our students, it's unstructured environments that cause them the most distress. And it's a particular challenge in the after school when the students have been through so much. It can be really hard to wrangle them. And so just like as much routine and structure that we can provide is just really, really wonderful. Before we get, I've got a little like problem of practice. Sorry, it's going the wrong way. Does anybody have any questions about any of these things that we've talked about? Any clarifying questions? Any ideas? Melanie.
Hello. I know with some kids, especially kids that tend to come from like chaotic environments, they structure and routine can feel unsafe. So would these same guidelines here and how to prepare also help them, or would there be a different approach? What would be your take on that?
So like when students seem to like push against like really like firm structure.
Yeah, because sometimes they can dysregulate with structure and routine because it feels unsafe. and that's not an environment that they're used to.
Hmm. I mean, sometimes it's just like being willing to show up every day and keep to consistency. A lot of our students have an experience of just like lots of subs or like just like inconsistency. And so I mean, if we're starting from a place of order, then we can be flexible. But I think if we're starting from a place where it's more loose and chaotic, it's really hard to achieve some of that order. I think also with these students, they can be really triggered by other students who are off task. And so helping sort of like the whole group to be on board is really helpful. I think we always want to be flexible when we can, but usually, I mean, if they're pushing back against structure and organization and consistency and being prepared, like those are precisely the things that we need to help them get better at. And so I think flexibility, but we really want to side on the side of structure and routine. Hope that helps. Robbie?
Yeah, a lot of the times, especially in the program that I'm currently in, we're seeing a lot of these behaviors within the program. And my question is how do we get access to know that these students have IEPs or 504s beforehand? Because we're finding a lot
that's
of
really yeah. Thank you for asking that question, because a lot of the time, like we get to the point where we're putting out fires all the time, and it's only when we have the time to prepare and to know the students who are coming in that we can really be successful. I'm wondering, Jasmine, do you have information on that?
Yeah, Robbie, what is your program?
Step Up.
Step Up. I know some programs are supposed to be included in intervention conversations, things like that. So I'm wondering if Step Up at your school is included in those conversations.
Yeah.
I also know that some schools give that information to like IEPs and 504s to their partners. So I'm wondering if there's a conversation that needs to be had between Step Up and administration. We can talk more offline too. If anybody's experiencing that as well, I can find out more information for you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And also, from what I understand, like you all should have access to the IEPs. And so like understanding that the school system is a system and it doesn't favor our, marginalized students or students with disabilities or students of color. So within that, just advocating and going out of our way to like ask the administration, ask the special education teacher for the IEPs. If we wait for the system to do right, we might be waiting for a long time. Elise.
My question is, can you differentiate between a 504 plan and an IEP?
Absolutely. So an IEP is determined that the level of need requires goals and services in order for the student to be successful in accessing the general education curriculum. A 504 is determining that the student just needs the accommodations. Like we don't need to change what we're teaching at all. We don't need to pull the student out. We just need to focus on like how we're delivering information to that student. And so sometimes this can be for a student with ADHD, they might have a 504 instead of an IEP. 504s will also include like access to the elevator if the student breaks their leg. It can be temporary. And another thing to note is that all of these supports are like designed with the purpose of fading away. And so we also want to be mindful of like supporting the student, but also like ensuring that we're preparing the student to be independent. Okay, I'm going to move on to the problem of practice. Please feel free to use the chat and interact during this part. So you have a student with an IEP for ADHD in your after-school program. They're likable and funny. They're emotionally immature and have a tendency to mess around rather than engage in the activity or finish their work. They seem to enjoy the attention that comes with redirecting and prompting, and can engage in back and forth arguments with the teacher. The student can bother their peers and can be inconsiderate of others, and often doesn't know when to quit. First off, just like a thumbs up or a wave of like, is this a familiar or common occurrence for anybody in the room? Okay, I thought it might be. We want to consider how this behavior might affect you and your ability to run your program. If anybody wants to unmute and share or pop in the chat, like, how might this impact you?
I was gonna say, my name's Alex. I'm with Campfire Columbia, and we are an after-school program in various schools in the Portland area and beyond. And we have a student that is on the spectrum, and we some of the trouble that we run into with our student is that he's exactly that description that you just shared. And he's a wonderful kid. And I would say he's relatively easy to work with. But we find that the trouble that we have is that whenever we have to interact with him, or we have to like pull him away from a situation, our challenge is that in turn takes away our attention from the other students.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's always a difficulty, because he has this impulsion that he wants to, he's got a very wide vocabulary, and he wants to share it with everybody, and his interaction with the other students is really tough. But we're really careful, because we don't want to necessarily describe his situation to the other students. So we're very careful about the way that we talk about him with the other students. And I think that they see that there's a difference in the way that we treat him versus the other students. But again, it's kind of this double-edged sword, where we don't want to point out the struggles that he's dealing with, but at the same time, we have to give him a little bit different treatment from the other students at times, so that we can, try to quell any trouble that he has with the other students. So it's an interesting situation. So.
Yeah, and I that can feel really frustrating, and it can put you in a really challenging position when you're having to sort of like weigh the experience and success of everyone else versus like the needs of another student. And I think, in the moment, it can make us frustrated with that student too. And that's a hard place to be as an adult with kids that we're trying to help nurture and educate, just to kind of feel that frustration. Thank you for sharing. The Black Excellence Group.
Hi there.
Hi.
This question hits home to the heart of why we run our program, why we do. I would say my most challenging out of 370 Black Excellence students is my own biological child, who's wired like this, who fits your videos to a T. And so the way that we've approached it as a program is why we structure so I would say in a way rigidly we always do 4 things a group. It's the same exact thing. And the third one always swaps out every week, that there's like a visual schedule every single week, because with that stability and structure that they know all 30 weeks, the entire school year, we come in, we do the same exact thing, that muscle memory begins to take. And then you get to do the pre-work instead of the whack-a-mole, which is painful. I just really feel for all of the people that have these kiddos that show up with out context, because it totally throws your group. And so I think one of the pieces that our team tends to employ real time in our groups is giving those kids jobs. And so if you know that they literally in the first 5 minutes of group always derail your instruction, then you're letting them lead that one piece of that, and then you give them some tasks that you know will give you that 30 seconds you need as a window. So I don't know, I think it's like very customly tailoring what are that kid's pain points, how can they engage, and how can they not derail you so you actually can get your program to be smooth enough that it's actually effective. So I don't know, really personalized strategies for what that kid needs, and none of them are the same. And then slash, some of our students in Black Excellence have to come with a para. And so one of the things that has worked really well is having that open communication with the school so that we are set up for success. And that student, if they have that high of needs, has it from day one so that they chill and they feel comfortable. And then almost always, except for one case, that para isn't needed after a few weeks because the kid is so, no matter how high their need, that kid is already in a rhythm. So I would try and start with tons of supports and then like try and trickle them off because the kid can probably do it. Most of our autistic nonverbal children can do it after a few weeks without their paras. So I don't know, just a little challenge.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's wonderful to hear. I think it's definitely like figuring out how to provide those spaces for the students to be able to shine and be able to be parts of our community. You know, for some of these students, our value system in the education system doesn't encapsulate a lot of the things that make them wonderful, special, amazing. And so they're kind of battling against that and, you know, looking for attention. And so like, how do we sort of funnel their attention and efforts into something that's productive, and then provide spaces to recognize them for who they are and just like acknowledge that they're important parts of what we're trying to do. I love hearing how you guys are working on it. Maxwell.
Thank you very much. I think my son is also the same. And being African immigrant, I didn't know that at first. And after learning about ADHD, we work together with teachers. However, most of our parents are the ones that there's a gap between the work that we do and the parents' understanding of their children's condition. So I feel like our staff are always trying to bridge that gap, but it has not been very easy. If you tell a parent that, oh, there's something wrong with your with the student, or we need some intervention, they're like, my child is just fine, you are just making these things up. So I believe that this training is really important for our staff and will give us some ideas on how we can navigate that process. And also the process is not very easy for African immigrant parents who are not educated in or even understand some of the language that are being used.
Yeah, I think I've lived outside of America and come back, and America's a funny place. And just like, there's a lot of questions I have around like the decisions we make about why we do what we do. And like going from, you know, something that's maybe a lot more community driven to something that feels really sort of abrasive and not inclusive at times is really challenging. So like, where a student might not show up some way in a different country, then come to America and not fit in, and then understanding how to navigate that process. I know that like we have a lot of work to do in sort of enabling a lot of our families to advocate for what they need. And you know, that there's a big discrepancy in parents who have the resources to reach out and demand what their student needs versus, you know, parents that maybe don't have the education or the time or the resources to do the same thing. And so I think, you know, understanding what the process is, working in these situations, and really working with the families to communicate what we're doing, and just like showing how like using foresight and planning and providing accommodations to like really show the value of their kid and show them, like, just reinforce that they are capable, is really important. So I really appreciate your sharing. I want to go over just like in thinking about what the function or purpose of the behavior might be. It is a lot of it can be just like their sense of belonging, and just like having to like define how they belong and take their space and get their attention, because they're not seen as valuable in their classroom setting, or they don't have a teacher that has classroom management that's done well enough to really get them the education that they need. So they're constantly looking for ways in which they fit in, ways they can be sort of reinforced. And some of it can be like, about hiding the pain that they feel, using humor to react to like the pain that it feels when you're not included in something, or to mask insecurities. And just like also just like being funny is something it's an attractive trait. And so trying to be funny, but like also like we're working with young kids that don't know the nuances of certain aspects of relationships or friendship, and that can be really hard for the student to try to get. And so like we've heard some like really great ways about how we might be able to support students being successful in our space. Like if you have the Black Excellence Group has a model that they can share, or just like, routines. I mean, I love the group routine, and I love being like conscious of like fading the adult support over time. Like that's exactly what we want to do. Some of our students are just kind of like a little bit doomed to like always have so much support. And like, I've worked with elementary through high school, and I've worked in high schools that really tracked what happens to our students afterwards. And I tell you what, it can get really scary and sad when we look at like the skills that we're letting our students leave our schools with, and then going out into the world. And just higher education is pretty cutthroat and brutal, and any other system, the housing, getting a credit card, a lot of these, we really want to prepare our students to be successful. So being mindful of opportunities to build independence. Other ways is to, if a kid wants to be funny, let's give them a little space to be funny. Maybe we have a stand-up comedian in our midst. Maybe we can give them 4 minutes to work on some jokes, and maybe we can talk to them about what it means to write jokes, or like tell them what an open mic is and have an open mic. Just being able to like have really direct conversations between like what is funny, what is irritating, what is offensive, and just being like, like that hurts people's feelings, and it's really not okay to say that. But what is a way that we can joke around? I think for a lot of our students that are like just really pervasive and like tend to perseverate on doing things, and like get like if we're constantly engaging in back and forth with them, that can be really unproductive, and it can take a lot of your time. And so using nonverbal communication and just like come up with a signal, like, you're doing too much. Just think about like how you're positioning yourself. Some students do really good with teacher proximity. Sometimes like if you're close, it really starts things up. Class jobs is something I was going to bring up too. Like, those kids with ADHD, they love a job. Sometimes like you can set up something like you have a 3-ring binder. And I don't know if the office is still open, but the kids like just, you can see the popcorn starting to pop, and you'd be like, you know what, I need you to take this binder to the office, have the office sign the binder and bring it back. It's just like something to get them up and move around. And just really relying on, the power of like parent communication, teacher communication. Like you're a part of the team and you have a lot to offer. And so like, do you have capacity, and can you like tap into the other resources? I'm sorry, I haven't really been monitoring the chat. we do want to make sure that we're addressing the stigma of having an IEP. And I think a lot of that just comes into like how like welcoming and useful the support really is and can be. But I think that is something that we want to be open about addressing, with just like people showing up differently and needing different things, and just understanding like how our culture values like ableism is a real thing. You know, like how do we talk with our students about ableism, racism, classism? Just like, you know, we really want to make sure that like we can be open about that and build acceptance and love. My time's about up. Last thing I kind of want to share with you is like sort of my notion of schools is a school is a ship, and our special education students are a lot of times the anchor. And if we don't support them, if we don't lift them up, oftentimes it just makes it so the whole ship can't go anywhere. And it like really hinders the capacity of the school to really do anything. But if we lift those kids up, we support them, we include them, we know that they're a valuable part, like we can really do whatever we want. And so just like, what can we do to prepare for them, accept them, love them, and nurture them? And thank you everybody for letting me come and speak with you. Thank you for all the participation, and just really appreciate everything that you all are doing.
Thanks so much, Paul. Oh, so appreciate it. The PowerPoint also has some really useful resources. And I will be posting the PowerPoint online. Thank you so much, Paul. You can leave if you'd like. You can stay for the second portion, whatever you'd like to do.
I do have to run. There are some other tools at the end of the PowerPoint. If you look at them, it can help with planning. And I created a Word document that you can make a copy of. So if you do have some time, see if these are helpful. I can see if I can pin that one in the chat as well. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. So our second portion is on suicide prevention and mental health with Amy and Mila. I don't think they're here yet, but that's okay because we can go over some housekeeping logistics. There are some folks who we don't have information for emails to send out the certificate. So if I just put your name in the chat, you could just, oh, you're here. Yay. Provide your information, and including your email and organization. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Amy and Mila.
Jasmine, in the name of, thank you so much for having us. In the name of mental health, can these folks take a 5-minute break?
Of course.
Okay, awesome. Everybody, hi, welcome. We're really excited to be here with you. Please take a 5-minute break. Get up, stretch, do what you need to do. And we'll see you at 10:37.
Thanks, Amy, for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so much information. Emil and I are really good at talking fast and being efficient with our information. We want to make sure people have all their needs met to the greatest degree we can. So
great.
And I'll get some more coffee. We just came from another presentation with seniors, high school counselors and social workers and school psychs talking about transitioning seniors. So it's been a busy morning.
That sounds great. I mean, sounds like you have been busy, but we so appreciate you being here.
Okay, we'll see you in just a sec.
Yeah.
Mila, are you here and did you figure out the sound? The silence would indicate to me the answer is no.
I don't think so.
She's restarting her computer.
Amy, would it be helpful for me to drop the PowerPoint in the chat so folks can follow along?
Yeah. Will you present the?
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. I have 2 different PowerPoints. Is it the one titled Presentation Suicide Prevention Partners?
Suicide prevention, we all have a role is the first slide. It's orange.
Right. Okay.
Okay, you have the, while Mila is restarting her computer. Does it seem like everybody is back-ish?
I think people are coming back. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. I'm going to drop the PowerPoint in the chat for folks who'd like to follow along as well.
Thanks so much, Jasmine. Just in thinking about time, I can get started with this first part while Mila's restarting her computer.
Great.
I'm here, Amy.
Oh, look at that. It's like magic.
That's what it needed. It just needed to restart because there was literally no sound either way. So I'm here though.
Awesome. Do you want to get started with the first slide and introductions?
Oh, sure, Amy Rona. Hello, everyone. It's so amazing to be part of this conversation. So Jasmine, thank you so much for having us. My name is Mila Rodriguez Adair, and I use she, her, ella pronouns, and I racially identify as Latina. Ethnically, I'm half Mexican and half Salvadorian. And I carry lots of different hats for student success and health, and I get to work with this lovely human, Amy. She's also my supervisor. But specifically for this conversation, I'll keep it basic that I am the suicide prevention coordinator for the school district, and so it's a big responsibility of mine to originally to put the suicide prevention policy together and also to now support school buildings across PPS and assuring that they're following the suicide prevention policy into actual practice. And one big part of the suicide prevention policy is providing training, is assuring that every single person that's part of PPS, not just our staff, but our contractors are also suicide prevention trained. And so it was lovely to have joined forces with Jasmine so that you all get the opportunity to also be part of receiving this training too. Amy.
Thanks, Mila. I'm Amy Rona, use she, her pronouns, racially identify as white, Finnish, and Irish. Our department has made a commitment to add our different intersectional identities when we introduce ourselves to really talk about the lens that we're bringing, and also it's the opportunity to name who's at the table and who's not at the table. Nicole, give your hand raised.
I just want to say that I love that because I'm the only person that I know who does that, and people look at me crazy. So thank you for doing that. I think it should be the standard to mention your intersectionality. So I just want to say props. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks for naming that.
Thank you for actually saying that out loud too. I think that what's interesting about that is that it's actually part of addressing suicide prevention, right? Is seeing the student whole, like all of them and what they come, and race and ethnicity is a huge part of why it is important, right? Like we have a lot of Black and brown students who are constantly activated by racialized distress. And it's a huge factor that often gets missed in our district. And so when I actually first came to PPS, that was not something that was openly talked about. And it was something that I often asked about, like, why aren't we introducing ourselves with this? We, as folks of color, the first thing that we do when we come into spaces is gauge who's in the space, who's not in the space from what we can physically see, right? But there's also lots of, like, I'm pretty white presenting and or ethnically ambiguous, but once people see here that I'm also Latina, it's a whole different vibe. And so it is important, and I'm so grateful to be part of a department that leads with race in mind proactively.
Yeah, I teach the Black affinity group at my school, and my daughter is white presenting. And so that definitely means a lot, especially with all the biracial children out there who you just don't know. We come in all different shades. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And I'll stop interrupting.
This is how we roll. We want people, it's not interrupting, you're adding to the conversation. So thank you. Yeah, so I work in student success and health with Mila, and I also do a variety of things. I support Mila's great work around suicide prevention intervention. Mila and I both do a lot of work around mental health contracts. So some of your buildings have contracted providers like Multnomah County, Life Stance, Morrison, etc. I also support the work of our behavioral safety assessment, threat assessment coordinator, and our substance use services team. And then Mila and I both do work around crisis recovery. Next slide. Awesome. So this will be really fun. If you could put in the chat, because there's so many of you, but we also want to get to know you. And as Mila was saying, it's really important to name who are you? What's important for us to know about you? So name, school program, share something we should know about you. I did a little example here that I eat popcorn almost every night. And something you're looking forward to, and that is also a suicide prevention strategy. So just take, 90 seconds to think about the questions, throw something in the chat so we can get to know who we are in space with.
Amy, Mila, I don't know if it's possible to give me access to the PowerPoint so I could share it with folks in the chat.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thank you. I'm just on view only.
And I'm wondering, Jasmine, if it's me, it might be a user error, but I can't see anybody and I can't see what you're presenting. Is that what is everybody seeing too? I can't see you either, Amy.
Oh, I can see people and the presentation.
Okay. That's so weird. Mine, it just says Jasmine presenting and it doesn't show exactly what you're presenting.
Yeah, I can represent it. Let me see if that helps.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, Robbie, we're just your name, program you're connected to, something we should know about you, something you're looking forward to. Yes, yes, yes.
Oh, love the NBA. Yes, me too. But so do I. The WNBA. Who loves that WNBA though?
Yes, the WNBA. And Mila's a big Laker fan, so.
Hello,
Kenny Adair. We have a relative in the house. Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Ouija boards, love it. Tarot tables. A lot of people looking forward to the good weather. It is coming, people. It is coming. This is the beginning.
Ooh, furniture. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for sharing this. Getting to know each other a little better, seeing what you've got in common. Yes, swimming in the rivers. Thanks, Jasmine. So as you all are engaging in this activity, again, thank you so much. We will continue to look at all the great stuff folks are sharing. Jasmine, can you share the next slide? Awesome. So our agenda today is really looking at suicide prevention strategies, student supports, and Q&A. And we love it when people raise their hands or put questions in the chat, and we will try to get to all of them. So there's no, if it's helpful to wait till the end, but honestly, if you've got something that's going to be like bugging you, please just ask, because we want you to be able to continue to stay focused and engaged. And sometimes questions just need to be asked in the moment. So we're super flexible, and we do this a lot. So Mila and I have kind of a pretty casual presentation style. Next slide, Jasmine.
And Amy, just awareness, like I still can't see the presentation, so just keep going until you want me to step in.
Okay. So learning objectives, you're going to have, Jasmine asked us to make a little quiz, I put in quotes, at the end so that you can get specific credits for being here. But upon completion of this session, you'll be able to name and implement some different suicide prevention risk factors, intervention strategies, and then know when to involve others when you have some mental health concerns about students that you're working with. And again, I know Mila said it just to uplift her message, like we are so grateful of the work that you all do in our buildings. We often talk about students being connected to positive adults, positive relationships, and you all are frequently named when we ask, and we're working with our student service providers, psychs, counselors, social workers, admin in the building, you know, who's the student's preferred person? Who do they feel connected with? Who do they have a positive relationship with? You all, the names that we're seeing in the chat and the organizations are who students talk about. So thank you for your work. You're a really integral part of suicide prevention work. So appreciate you and really appreciate this time. Next slide. Yeah, so we are always talking about using a comprehensive approach. We always say that suicide prevention is not just about a curriculum. We frequently, actually, it's getting better, Mila, I feel like. But in the past, we would frequently hear folks say, well, we don't have a suicide prevention curriculum we use, so we don't do suicide prevention at our school. And we'd say, well, do you have affinity spaces? Well, yeah. Do you have a food pantry? Yeah. Do you work with students around getting connected to resource? Yeah. Like all of those things are suicide prevention. We have to really expand how we think about suicide prevention. And again, being connected to positive, healthy activities is an incredible suicide prevention strategy. Next slide. Mila, because you were the leader of the district suicide prevention policy passage in January of 2021 in the middle of a global pandemic. Would you like to speak to that?
Yeah. Yes, thank you, Amy, for working through the dysfunction over here. So a huge part of why my position was a position in the first place is that Addie's Act Senate Bill 52 was put into place after a young person from our particular district died by suicide. Addie Staub, their father actually advocated through legislation to assure that there was something in place across the state of Oregon that assured that each school district had a suicide prevention policy in actual place. So thankfully within our department, they hired me to assure that we put something together that also followed the law, Addie's Act Senate Bill 52. And that was actually going to be responsive. So Amy and I actually traveled virtually and or in person in connecting with students, staff, and adults and family members, asking them what they wanted to see in our actual suicide prevention policy, what their thoughts were around what their building was or wasn't doing regarding suicide prevention, what their thoughts were around suicide screenings, what their thoughts were about the adults that are trained or not trained. And so we used all of that feedback and all of the amazing work that Amy and others in my department had already been doing for years prior to having this policy put into actual place, and put it into one place for the board to approve. And so it was indeed approved. And I would say, not to just, pat myself in the back, but I will, along with Amy, that I actually think it's probably one of the most culturally responsive policies out there when it comes to Senate Bill 52 in particular across the state of Oregon. People look to our policy and have reviewed it and have taken some parts of our policy to mirror them. Mostly because I didn't, I'm a macro social worker, so I think systems, I love policies, I love developing policies, but one of the biggest things was I felt as though that I didn't want to have like a copy and paste. I wanted to have something that was actually going to be responsive to the students that were significantly at risk for suicide in our district. And so I wanted to have it be responsive. And so one of them, one big section of the policy talks about assuring that every single person in our school district is appropriately trained. And so the beginning of the school year in September, we spent some time with SCI folks providing some one-on-one suicide prevention training with them, because again, you all are suicide prevention strategies in our district. And it's it's of the most importance to make sure that you all have the skills, abilities, and being able to understand what to do if a student comes to you and discloses suicide ideation. And so there is a policy. We also have a protocol district-wide of what to do when a student does have gestures, talks about suicide, including thoughts and or expressed in writing and or expressed on social media, in a text message, etc., of what to do, right? So we as student service providers, school social workers, school psychologists, school counselors, administrators have a requirement or what we are to do and how we are to screen. And you all, as our contractors, have a requirement to also follow our protocol when a student does disclose per the policy. And so the protocol will let you know, if you actually click on the actual protocol, it will let you know your responsibility is to listen to the student with empathy, compassion, and assure that we're then passing on the student over to the appropriate student service provider that they feel the most comfortable with in initiating a suicide screening. That's what's really important, because I know that in a lot of our consultations, we also hear, right, that a lot of you perhaps even haven't had the opportunity to receive the training, so therefore didn't even know that there was an actual protocol to follow when it came to a student disclosing, and you all felt the need to carry it all by yourselves and without even knowing and understanding, right, that you all had people to wrap around you. And so for our protocol, the student service providers are required to receive specific suicide prevention training and also specific training on how to assess and how to actually screen a student. Their responsibility is to screen a student, not to provide a full assessment of a student, so that they can then be referred out to community resources, and or honestly, when there's an immediate risk and we need to address it right there and then, because we're actually absolutely so stressed out and nervous that the student has a plan, has an intent, has access, meaning has a gun, has a specific plan, and has all access to all the things to be able to follow through with that plan. We are to immediately use the crisis line, which is the number on here, 503-988-488. We recommend everybody to use that screening, that crisis line number. One, because it's free. Two, because it's an immediate crisis response, meaning that the person answering the phone is somebody who is clinically trained to essentially address the current crisis, the mental health crisis, and be able to give you guidance. If they feel that perhaps the guidance is not enough verbally over the phone, they do have the capacity to send mobile response to the building to address the crisis. Now, the student service providers are trained to also make those calls and to work along with. I also know that you all have very specific relationships with students, right? Like, I know that most of the time, this is feedback from our SCI folks as well, they felt that a lot of the students didn't want to go to student service providers, didn't feel like they had a trusting relationship with them. You all can offer the student that because they are the ones that are trained, they are to screen the people, but that you can also walk in with the student, stay with the student as the student is being screened. That's also a big lesson learned that folks didn't know either, right? Like, I know that most of the time they feel the most connected to you all, that you are the trusted people to connect with, and want to make sure that you all are being wrapped around by the student service provider so that you all don't feel like you have to carry it all. especially when it comes on a weekend, right? Like I'm sure that you all get text messages on the weekend or whatever it is, phone calls, etc., that you all know that there are protocols in place for PPS on what to do if that is the case and how to redirect a student to proper supports when they're above and beyond what you can indeed do within your own agency and protocol. So again, policy, we do have them, and I really, really encourage all of you to spend a little bit of time reviewing the actual policy. And then we can also come back to your individual agency and really go through step by step what the policy requires along with the actual protocol. For this presentation, we're trying to blend all of the things so that you all can have like kind of a global understanding of what your immediate role and responsibility will be, but just wanting to make sure that you all have as much information as possible. Elise, see your hand.
It was actually me, Kenny.
Hello, Kenny. Hi.
The question was, when we do go sit in with the student and the service provider or counselor or whatever, that doesn't cross any like confidentiality or HIPAA laws at the same time?
That's a great question. No, because we're asking the student, right, as well. Like, so for example, Kenny, like if you have a student that's telling you like, gosh, I really do have a plan, I do have access, and I really do want to kill myself. And then you say, hey, thanks for trusting me with this information, and how brave of you for you to disclose that. I know that there are people in this building that are trained and are required to actually fully complete a screening for you. Can I walk you to this person? Out of these 4 people that are here, who is the main person that you feel the most connected to? And if they say, Kenny, to you, like, hey, is it possible for you to stay back and stay with me? That's totally fine. Now, if like they haven't even asked and you offer and they say no, but then you force yourself in there, then of course, right? Like that's like totally going against all things. But no, you are their trusted person. You are the person that they feel comfortable with. And if they want you there, you should be there. Now, if the student service provider says, hey, you're not supposed to be here because of HIPAA confidentiality, blah, 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 then you can redirect them and say, actually, per the training that we received from Mila and Amy regarding this, if the student desires for our presence to be in this space, I'm actually going to stay in this space. You can always redirect them to that because it is important to be student-centered. That's what I don't ever want to get lost in this conversation, Kenny, which often tends to happen is that adults tend to be adult-focused rather than what's going to be best for the student. So if it's best for the student for you to be there, then stay there, and you can redirect them back to us if they have further questions or concerns. And for your building in particular, I believe you're at Franklin, they know that very well and should know that. And if for any reason they feel like it's still crossing a line or barrier, don't hesitate to reach out to us to let us know so that we can, go back gently with that school team to remind them of our protocol and our policy. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Awesome.
I actually have, thank you, Kenny. I actually have a follow-up question to that.
Okay. And so, Melanie, I see your hand after this follow-up question. Go ahead.
Our program is after school. And knowing that a lot of these, I think of our social workers, Jed and Molly, they're not here after school. So would it be the plan of action for our advocates to connect with our student success specialist, which is our counselor, and then they together call this county line? And I know that if a student is like, I actively have a plan, I actively have access to this plan, I've learned that as adults, we're not allowed we should not just send them home by themselves. Like they need to be in adult presence until help is made. So what is the protocol for an after school situation?
That is such a great question. I would also make sure to, you step up, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Make sure that also whatever your protocol is, to make sure to also follow that as well, right? Because I'm not quite sure exactly what your protocol is for something like that. Our protocol for being in the building, supporting this particular student with this particular situation, yes, please have a joint process, your co-counselor or whomever your counselor is at the moment, to call the crisis line. Now, the goal for that particular individual that answers that phone call is to give you guidance as far as what to do with that particular student. Now, the goal as well will be to, because our protocol is to also inform the parent caregiver. So that's actually the biggest reason why this policy or this policy became a law, because Addie's father felt as though PPS did not do a sufficient job at actually informing dad regarding student disclosure. And that is part of our policy. There's a lot of times where students get really anxious and they're like, please don't tell the parent, please, 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 never mind, I'm fine, everything's okay. We are required to say something to the parent caregiver. Now, if the student says something along the lines of like, hey, I don't feel safe with my parent, and that's actually the reason why they're causing distress and the reason why I want to kill myself, yes, please, like, be careful on how you manage that parent conversation and call one of us, call Amy or I, because in those cases, we want to be very careful on what information goes through to the parent caregiver and how, and we want to be very cognizant on that. Now, if the student is fine, you do the process and you call the crisis line, they give you some direction, they do some proper safety planning, and then you all feel good, you still have to call the parent caregiver. And the goal at that point would be for you all to inform the student service provider team, the school social worker, Jed, and their assigned school counselor, even if it's via email, to say, hey, FYI, we had to call the crisis line. The student was able to come up with a proper safety plan. They went home with an active plan, but I encourage you to actually follow through with the student tomorrow when they come into the building. Now, you do all that messaging and that summary, Jed gets it. Jed is actually really good about following through, making sure, dotting the I's, crossing all the T's, checking in with the student. At that point, the student service provider has a plan that if the student doesn't show up after an incident like this, that we are to then assure that we're giving a call to the parent caregiver to assure that everything's okay. Sometimes they take an extra mental health day, but we just want to make sure that they're actually indeed okay at home. And then you inform your proper administrators, and then also that we're doing the best that we can to also inform the administrators in the building if there's no student service provider around. We just want to make sure that the information doesn't just land on your shoulders for all of you to carry, because you already carry so much for these students, that we want to make sure that that information does indeed get passed along to the student service providers. So just to recap the whole thing, to summarize, 1, we want to make sure to call the crisis line. 2, that whatever the summary of that conversation, and or if they send project response, that mobile crisis response, that we are adding that information in the summary to the student service provider team, and that we are also calling the parent caregiver. So that they are aware that the student in your program did disclose and they followed proper protocol by letting people know and also calling the crisis line, and that you are informing the student service provider team to follow up on with the student. If the parent caregiver doesn't answer and you're feeling a little concerned about the student, try calling the emergency number to assure that at least another trusted adult knows the information. And you can tell that emergency number, hey, I'm trying to get a hold of parent, really trying to send on some really important information. Can you please have that parent call me? You don't have to give any information. They don't need to know all the information, but just letting them know that there is something that needs to be disclosed to the parent caregiver. But most importantly, that information is going back to the student service provider team. Lots of nuanced stuff here too, which is why I'm always like, don't ever be afraid to reach out to Amy and or I, and we'll give you another number to reach out to. If it's like really late and you have nobody else to call, we'll give you our Black phone number to reach out to. But you can always reach out to Amy and we will give you all that information too if you ever are in that little kind of stuck situation and need some extra guidance. Amy, before I get to Melanie, did you want to add anything else to that I may have missed in that?
That was incredibly thorough. Great question. Thank you, Franklin team. And thanks, Mila. Yeah, incredibly thorough answer. I think I'm thinking of a specific situation that was on a Friday night with a community-based provider, with a partner. The student had gone home and was texting the partner and talking about suicidality. Partner you were consulting with your supervisor, again, kind of following your protocol for your agency. And then I remember provider called the crisis line, supervisor called the principal to say, hey, it's Friday night at 6 o'clock. We need to make sure you all know something's going on. Principal called me, so I was able to be in the loop. So the end of the day, it's all about you not holding information by yourself or carrying this really intense information and making sure others need to know, people are looped in. I think the other piece is we know that you are very skilled and qualified to have conversations with students. And in no way, when we're talking about, oh, the student service provider has this training, that is in no way to minimize you or your work or your skills. It's really about role, because we know that you all are doing a million other things. And when someone sits down to do a suicide screening, it can take hours. It can turn into, right, a really long, involved process. And we know that that's, though you may come with those skills and abilities, that's not your role in the building. You're responsible for all these other things. And so that's why we talk a lot about that handoff and you being a really integral part of that. But it's just because oftentimes that can end up turning into a 2, 3, 4 hour process. And we know that you have other responsibilities in the building as well. So that's all that I would add. Melanie?
Thank you. One question I have is, typically our student service providers within the school that I work in, they tend to be on the move trying to help kids who may be dysregulating or need some support. So if a student comes up to us that is within our program, even if we're not in program at the time, if they disclose that they're considering suicide, any of these things, and we cannot find a student service provider, do we need to just stay with the student until we can?
Are you meaning like during, I'm just going to ask clarifying questions. Do you mean during the day, like during the school day? Is that what you mean?
Yes, because some of us stay within the school between our before and after care.
Okay. I would say, I'm going to answer it twofold. And then Amy, of course, please jump in. One, I would say, yes, student service providers are on the move, on the go, and they are still required to do a screening for the student. So I wonder, do you have access to specific cell phone numbers that you can have, like start a group chat to say, hey, I have a student concern and suicide screening needs to be done ASAP? Wondering if that's something that you all are already doing, just out of curiosity.
No, that is not something I have access to.
Okay. That you don't have access to?
No.
Okay. I'm wondering if that's a conversation that could be brought up to your student service provider team as well, just to say like, hey, I want to make sure that I know that y'all are super busy and in receiving, and if you want some extra support around this, I'm more than happy to do that. I would encourage you to say like, hey, I just finished a training with Amy and Mila, and I think I would love to have a conversation with you all that when we have a student who is expressing suicidality, what would be the best way to get a hold of you if, for example, none of you are around for me to connect with immediately? I think that really is super important as far as that goes. And then, of course, at that point, if you're not there yet and having that conversation with them about how to get a hold of them, I would say find an administrator, because they are also should be trained on how to also have these conversations as well, and are also part of our policy. So I'd say it's about planning with them. And we can remind our student service providers, since we have access to them, about, hey, please include, your contractors in these conversations on how to get a hold of you if they do have a student of concern. That's really important. So it's a yes and hold on to the student. And if it's concerning enough and you can't get a hold of a student service provider, still call the crisis line with the student. I just want to make sure that at least the student is at least served immediately if that is the case, because that is part of our protocol. But if you feel like it's manageable and doable for that student to still stay with you and you're still trying to get a hold of somebody, that's okay too. But just making sure that student service provider team is having a conversation with you around, and your team around, how do we get a hold of you? Y'all are running around all over the place, and sometimes I don't see you. What would be the best way to get a hold of somebody when a student does need to be screened? That would be a great conversation for all of you. I would encourage for all of you to have, and we can also remind our student service providers about that as well. Amy, did you want to add anything else?
I absolutely love these questions. I think I used to do a lot of training with childcare providers, after school providers, years ago. And one of the things that folks would say consistently that was really helpful was at the beginning of the year, sitting down with the partner team and the student service provider team and admin. And I know everybody's super busy, but what we say in our department is it's time on the front end or time on the back end. Like, we're going to be putting the time in either way, but taking 30, 45 minutes to just get everybody on the same page around, we know that students have safety and support plans during the school day. They move into some of your programming after school. Are those applicable to you all? What is our agreement here? We know things might come up in your programming. What is our communication strategy for getting that information back to the school team, like what we're talking about today? So just everybody getting on the same page about how we're sharing, again, need to know information back and forth. So that, that's super trauma informed, right? It's so families don't have to tell and retell their stories, but so students have a level of consistency as they're kind of moving in and out of different programming. But getting that time at the beginning of the year can be really, really helpful. And I know a number of providers said, like, once they pivoted to that, and I'm sure a number of you are already doing that and really have great communicative relationships, but staffing changes, people change, admin changes. And so I think just having that as a habit at the beginning to get everybody on the same page and doing a check-in mid-year, like, how's this going? Do you feel like you're getting the information you need from us? Because nobody needs to be reinventing the wheel. These are all of our kids that we're working with, and we want to make sure that we're wrapping around them with support. And we already know that students are doing code switching during the day, but not to add an additional kind of layer to that code switching. So.
And I would say that, thank you for saying that, Amy, because I think the other thing that I was thinking about is, like, for us, we just need to continue reminding student service providers to not think of you as an afterthought, but to think of you as part of the family, right? Like, as part of them too, because like Amy said, my kids are your kids are our kids, right? Like, we all need to find some way to communicate and connect. And so thinking about how to collaborate with you from the get-go. And so not when something is urgent and emerging, right? So that is something we will continue to work on to remind them that it's a partnership. Y'all are gifts in our buildings. And how do we treat you all as such, while also partnering and honoring the fact that you are probably the most connected to students, right? And so that's a really good reminder for us to keep that in mind in talking to our students. Because student service providers, because we have been spending the last couple of days talking to student service providers about our graduating seniors and how there is so much data to show that our graduating seniors are at higher risk of dying by suicide. And so they're already engaging in those conversations. So all that to say that if you have a student in mind, a senior in mind that you're concerned about, talk to your student service provider, right? So again, we need to start thinking about folding you all in from the get-go, not just, when things arise. So it's a really good reminder. Does that answer the questions? Any follow-up on those things that we just answered? I see a hand.
Hi there, it's Mashari. How about just some guidance on, I would say most of our school sites, communication's super easy. There's like once in a while we're at a school and the administrator's clearly scared to tell us information and be open and like gatekeeps everything for an intention of trying to uphold student privacy. What kind of like one-liner to disarm them so that they share more openly so that we can be that like partner team would you suggest?
That's a really good question, because also hoarding information is a white supremacy characteristic. And so it's like not even student-centered at that case, right? And can understand people's perspectives around like trying to protect a student. And again, that's also not student-centered. So I guess my feedback to that would be, for most people that know me know that I'm a very direct person. And so I don't know if this is going to be applicable to you, but I'm always I'm wondering why the need to withhold information. I'm just curious, because I know that knowing this information is actually going to be supportive in me supporting this student. And so bringing that back to them, presenting that question back, often it's like, oh, okay, let me pause for just a second and think about why I'm not wanting to share this information, right? It's proposing the question back to them, I guess is what I'm saying. The second thing, when it comes to mental health concerns. Part of it is like protection around confidentiality, et cetera, and like we are all under the same school district. You all take the same training. You all take, meaning like that require mandatory training. You all are part of an agency. You all are contracted partners. Y'all are part of us. And so no, you are part of the need to know information if you are part and connected to a student. So I would say letting that student service provider know, like, hey, I'm connected to this student, therefore I'm part of the need to know information team of people. I would love to hear what's up with the student or what's an update regarding X, Y, and Z. So they all know, student service providers are trained regarding the need to know people, because that is how we train, Amy and I, around here are the need to know people that you should be passing out this information to. And the need to know people expands depending on the need of the student. So if you're already involved in a student's life for a variety of different reasons, there's a reason why you're part of the need to know people that need to know that information. So that would be your one-liner, would be, hey, I'm part of that need to know people team. And so I'm wondering if you can share some of that information regarding the student.
Thank you. That's so valuable. I really appreciate that. That'll really unlock things. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. And if you do get pushback or perhaps like, I don't know, you can always blame Amy and I. You can just say, well, we attended this training with Amy and Mila, and they really did provide this information around need to know people. And they did reaffirm that we were one of those people. Blame us too.
And I see your comment, George. Yes, we will absolutely continue to reiterate that in our work with school teams, 100%.
Oh my gosh, Amy, I just saw your message.
I know, I was writing it as you were saying it. Same brain. I put in the chat, we started this work around looping in campus safety associates around safety and support planning. We started that work like 3-4 years ago, and we're really seeing it come to fruition now where, campus safety associates would say they loop us in when the student is running down the hall, when the student is eloping, and then they wonder why we're not, and we're like, we didn't know. So I feel like folks have responded really well to our incorporation of the need to know group needs to be bigger. And it's like, what information, right? There's different information that different people need to know, and folks just need to be nuanced, and like, this can all work. We're all adults who can communicate. And so I think too, Mashari, like if we ever see a pattern, we can always, and Mila and I do this all the time with coaching, consulting, professional development. We're not ever like, oh my gosh, your Black Excellence group, like they said, ever. We just loop back to people in like a tier 1 way and say, we're also very direct, as Mila said, and we can do tier 1 work around everybody needs to be reminded. Your community partners are an incredibly integral part of the work with students, and they would fall under that need to know group when you're talking about safety and support planning. So
I love that. Thank you guys. I may be one plug for Leadership Week that happens, in August or whatever, when every single school leader's there. It would be really cool for you guys to say something like that, because every partner would be given this like umbrella of we're in this together. And I think that just like public reminder of commitment would be super cool, because it depends what building you're in, and you can't really serve in the needs of the student if it gets like, handcuffed. Thanks, you guys. I appreciate what you do.
Yes.
Well, we appreciate you. I'm also keeping track of time, Jasmine, and it's like 10 minutes for 11:30. And so I am wondering if, I don't know, because we can continue doing like continuing the presentation and leaving the presentation with you all. And we can always come back and continue to have these conversations whenever. All we need to do is just get invited to these spaces. And I completely agree. Anytime we can get in front of admin, that's always a gift. And I know that Amy and I beg for time. So anytime, anywhere, people can, invite us, we will do it. And, or if we don't, and unfortunately, people are so used to seeing Amy and I in moments of catastrophe, deaths, and et cetera. And those are the moments that we take opportunity to give consultation, guidance, et cetera. But anytime we can get in front of admin, it's always a gift. So Amy, what are your thoughts about just continuing the conversation and or continuing to answer Q&A?
Yeah, I think I think this next chunk of information, frankly, we can cover in just a couple of minutes, just to kind of throw it out there, and then spend the last bit of time answering questions. I think because the next chunk of information may evoke additional questions.
Great. And then I can also keep the room open until 11:40 if we want to go 10 minutes extra, and folks that need to leave can leave. The session is also recorded and you can watch the last 10 minutes. And certificates will be emailed out next week, and you'll be receiving emails around logistics.
Thank you so much. And yeah, please dip out if you need to. So the next slide was around addressing cultural differences. I know for me, like if the reason why I never connected to a student service provider when I was in high school was because they were not culturally and linguistically responsive. One. Two, they were very pervasive and often thought that I was not going to equate to nothing. And so the conversations with them were very minimal around academics and or success, however that meant for them. And so we want to be mindful of how we are having conversations with students about suicide. And so one of the biggest things that I remember in training the, oh my gosh, I know the campus monitors or security.
Campus safety associates, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Was that I remember, I know it's very deeply ingrained in our culture too, saying the word suicide is hard. And asking a student, are you wanting to die by suicide, is hard too. And people don't understand that that's how we should be naming it, but it's hard. And so I remember having to practice with them out loud because one of them said, you know, the word S, or like that S word. And then I said, well, let's just practice together. Suicide. Let's say it out loud, suicide, because it is important to be direct. It is important to name it. And I know that we just we can at times, you know, follow our own cultural nuanced ways, but not be as specific and as directive when it comes to this world of suicide, right? So I think it's really important for us to really engage in those culturally and linguistically responsive conversations. I mean, I feel like you all understand this. And it's important to be able to engage in like, what does this mean for you? Does it actually mean that you want to die, right? And if you want to die, what are your plans around dying? One of the biggest feedback that we had from students is that they often knew, this is what they said, they knew when adults were uncomfortable in talking about it. So they're like, we could see you get uncomfortable and awkward, therefore, why would we want to talk to you about how we were feeling about wanting to kill ourselves? If you were indeed uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable topic. And so being mindful of how you feel about it. So the work starts with you and really addressing it with yourself. And then I know for, you know, maybe some of us have that lived experience around perhaps when you were younger and you had this feeling, thinking, and desire, and perhaps have your own way of addressing this in your own culture and your own community. And so being mindful of how students engage in that, right? And especially when it comes to healing. One of the biggest things that I talk about in safety planning is that our young people, and in particular students of color, don't often just heal by like having a bubble bath and going to see a therapist. Of course, that's great. And that's not often the case for many of our students, right? So really thinking through the layers of their culture and how they choose, you know, how they define healing, how they address help, how they address death in their culture, how they address when somebody does die by suicide, how are they addressing the community violence and the impact that it has on students, because that is not, you know, suicide. And so really unpacking all of that within your culture is of the most importance. And then one thing that I wanted to fold into this conversation as well is that one big call to action from the Oregon Department of Education, Lines for Life, and Oregon Health Authority was access to safe firearm, like making sure that the firearms are secure safely and knowing how to have those conversations, because that is one way to address suicide and access, because lethality when it comes to that is immediate. And so there's been a lot of information passed out to student service providers as of yesterday, well, as of this week, around making sure that students that are on safety plans and need access to gun locks have them, and that for folks that need access to med locks have them, right? That we're not to have a shame or blame conversation about people that have guns. It's not about that. It's about making sure that people are indeed assuring that those guns are actually indeed locked safely, especially when it comes to students that are definitely impacted by suicide, and their desire and lethality is definitely super accessible at home. So that's really also part of the conversation too. Any thoughts, questions, concerns about that? Awesome. And yes, we do have gun lock donations. So if you need that, let us know. Send us an email.
To Mila, you know what you said, where students have said very clearly, we can tell when folks are staff are uncomfortable. They can also tell when you are comfortable and when you demystify talking about suicide, and they say like, oh, now I know I can talk to you about this because you did say the S word, you did say suicide. You appear to be somewhat comfortable having this conversation. I can have this conversation with you and can continue to, because you've now totally demystified it by using the word and not making me feel any shame and blame around kind of bringing up these feelings. So, and as Mila said, we know that everybody has lived experience. We all have lived experience. And so if you need to tap out and you know you have, this is directly impacting you, someone in your life, and you're like, I am not in the space to do this, that is okay. You are a human and you just need to tap out and make sure one of your colleagues, again, supervisor, one of the school staff, whoever knows that they need to be tapping in, because you need to take some space around this. Again, your mental health is just as important as student and family mental health. So we need to make sure that you all are doing okay before you're working alongside your students and families.
Yeah. And I would also say that the other thing that I was just thinking about from feedback that we actually got from students of color in particular, and I can also feel this way too, that students were also wondering where this information was going. Because I know for me, I'm often, I have a son in PPS, so I often wonder how he is being talked about in documentation, right? And so I'm always curious as well as a parent, like, how are things being documented? Who's receiving the documentations, et cetera, et cetera. So with suicide screenings, Amy and I receive the suicide screenings, and we read every single suicide screening that comes through with the intention to wrap around the student service provider that actually sends the suicide screening. And that's so that it doesn't feel like it's going to a dark black hole and nowhere to be seen. We provide a lot of consultation around them. So that's one thing. The second thing is the person who submitted the actual suicide screening is the person who also receives the suicide screening and the identified safety plan. And at that point, that student service provider is required to have a locked folder in a system within that school to assure they're keeping track of suicide screenings and updating their safety plans. And then therefore sharing need to know information from that suicide screening and that safety plan to the appropriate people. And that is it. Nobody else reviews them. Nobody else has access to them at all. Actually, matter of fact, with safety plans, once that safety plan gets updated, iterated and changed, we don't have access to it at all either, which is totally fine and appropriate. But it is really important that if you, as a person in our building supporting a student, are part of an actual safety plan, that you should be part of the safety planning meeting and part of the conversation as well. So that's also something that I did not want to forget to also talk about, because a lot of our students were very concerned about that. And then same for information that gets shared to parent caregivers as well. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. I don't know what slide we are on, Jasmine, because I still can't see anything.
Yep.
This is just, again, kind of what we've already talked about, that this is a collective effort. It doesn't fall on one person's job, one person's role, that we're all really in this. Student service providers, you all, school nurses, admin, et cetera. And that having open communication is just really, really essential when it comes to suicide prevention.
Yeah. Yep. And then for most of you, you all know that we have school-based mental health providers across our district. And then I know for some, we have very specific culturally and linguistically responsive providers in our district, and they too have their own requirements around safety planning and or suicide screenings, but they also work very closely with student service providers as well regarding the students that they serve in the building. So just know that they're also being wrapped around by their mental health provider as well. And if for any reason you feel the need that you need to share information to the provider, obviously please let the student know. And the providers are in the building for that reason, to also care coordinate and support the student within collateral information. The following slides are myths and facts about suicide. And that's something that you all can easily review, that we don't have to go one by one. Unless, Amy, is there something else that you wanted to say about the myths and facts, knowing that it's already 11:30?
No, this is all stuff that we've already talked about. Next slide. Yeah, we know that there are occasions where a suicide attempt or completion, and you will notice that we use the language die by suicide, not commit suicide. That's really a way that everybody in the work has pivoted around the communication. They're not committing a crime. This is, so we are very intentionally talking about it that way. Sometimes it happens impulsively. When we talk about reducing access to means, that is a big suicide prevention strategy. Whether it's an impulsive decision, frequently it is not. Frequently, folks who are suicidal there's different signs that are emerging in the weeks and days leading up to it. They're communicating some sort of intent. Sometimes they can feel a lot better and actually seem a lot happier because they've come to peace with their decisions. So I know this can feel really confusing and like, wait a minute, things were going poorly for them. They seemed really depressed, and now suddenly they seem better, and everybody feels better because the student seems better. But if there is a significant shift in behavior and not a lot of understanding as to the why, there's not been any significant variable shifts in their life, that is really something to look at as well. Anytime there's any kind of significant shift in behavior. And I noticed a lot of folks talking about the weather. I'm on the exact same page as you. And it's really interesting and concerning what research has shown is in the springtime, when the weather improves in a lot of places or becomes sunnier, that folks will look around them, folks who have had some suicidal ideation intent, and they'll say, wow, I was feeling bad throughout the winter, and it seemed like everybody else was kind of feeling bad too, and talking about the weather. And now that the weather is better, everybody seems to be feeling better except me. And that's where attempts increase, completions increase, because now they're suddenly noticing this disparity between their experience and the experience of others around them, if that makes sense. We could do an entire training about that. Next slide, Jasmine. These are just really key risk factors to understand when people are feeling hopeless, disconnected, like a burden. That's why we talk about, thank you for sharing this, to Kenny's question at Franklin, like, thank you for sharing this information with me. This was really brave. I really appreciate you trusting me with this information. We don't ever want a student to feel like they're burdening us with this. Again, the disconnection, you all are a connection to students. And then that access to means, or knowing someone who's died by suicide, being exposed to suicide, those are big risk factors as well.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about this, Mila? And folks,
I can't see what you're on.
Oh, yeah. Connecting with a student you're concerned about. You're like, yes, I've told you that, Amy, like 4 times.
Yeah, I don't know what's not what. I think we've talked a lot about this. I think that one of the most important things that I really want to just reiterate is just being mindful of also what's happening to your body, your mind, and if you need to tap out, like, to be mindful of that, but making sure that you're stopping everything that you're doing to give your student the full attention. That we're not creating like a joke or a mockery or whatever, because sometimes that, they get a little anxious and they're nervous. And sometimes they are just playing around. They're like, no, I was just playing around, right? So it's making sure that we are giving our full divided attention to them, and then making sure that we're also acknowledging their reality of how they're feeling and what they're saying, right? So we may not always understand why they're feeling what they're feeling, why they're feeling so depressed, but that we acknowledge and appreciate their bravery in sharing, and that when it comes to suicide, they may believe that that's the only solution and that it's unsolvable. And we all know that most of the time it's like the pain that they're feeling, like they just want the pain to stop, right? Which is why it's so critical and so pivotal at that moment to assure that they're also getting screened so that they are indeed getting supports to address that pain that they're feeling. And that we're not immediately rushing towards judgment. I know a lot of the times they're like, I know I've done this before. This has been an infraction that I've done just out of curiosity and just, for playing around. I'm like, oh, you really don't want to kill yourself, right? Like, come on. And so that's something that I've had to unlearn and do differently and do better next time, that we're making sure that we're not coming off our own bias from what we know about the student. And then again, right, like experiencing, just being grateful and thankful to them for their trust, because it is a big deal for students to come to you. I think the other thing too, when it comes to that trust piece, because they trust you all so much, they also disclose, right? Like that the student service providers may or may not be their trusted adults. And so y'all need to be prepared and knowing what to say at that point, right? Like being able to say, I hear you, Amy. I know that right now you're not feeling like none of these folks are available as a trusted adult for you. And know that, I'm here to walk this journey with you. And that if there's anything that we could do, that I can do as your support person during that time, please let me know. And that student service provider is indeed trained, and this is part of their job, to address how you are feeling. And then, of course, making sure that, we're asking the question, right? Like, are you wanting to kill yourself? So that was that for that. And then I think the next slide is slide 14, right? On what to do next. Am I seeing that correctly? No?
Yeah, it's just got a bunch of quotes on there.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. And so these are like just suggestions on what we're thinking you can indeed say when a student does come to you, right? So you've already acknowledged their bravery. You've already acknowledged and taken some time to check in. You've already asked them the question. And they clearly have said, yes, I want to die. Yes, I have a plan. And at that point, we are providing quotes for you in case you do need them, right? Will you go with me to talk with the person you're most comfortable with, right? Out of the student service providers. Could that be the school social worker, the school psychologist? And if they say no, 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 we have to redirect them to say, right, like I can be there with you as your support person through this, as they are the people, right? And or can I tell your preferred person that you would like to talk to them, right? So sometimes that preferred person is not there for that day. That, for example, if they say at Franklin, well, it's typically Jed's not there today, he's out sick, then we say, would it be okay if we initiate the conversation with another trusted adult? We don't have to finish the conversation with them, but at least initiate so that they are aware. And then tomorrow we can check in with Jed. How does that feel like for you? So that at least we're having one of the student service providers at least tap in with the student to quickly address access, lethality, et cetera. And so one of the things to also note is that at least one of the school social workers, one of the school counselors, and or both need to be informed, right? So earlier I was talking about sending an email as well, just to follow up with closing all the loops. That's really important. I would say, I know I keep talking about Franklin, but Franklin's at the forefront of my head because Jed is actually really, really good at sending those summary emails. And I talk about, his summary emails often because they're magical and put people together and summarize all the things that were being done by the student and for the student. And so that's something we also really encourage all of you. If you were the prime person to do all that care coordination essentially and to make all those connections, that you are the one to initiate that summary email to the need to know people. And typically the need to know people from your perspective will be their assigned school counselor, the admin, and then the school social worker at that point. Any other questions or concerns? Any other thoughts, perspectives, anything that was missed on our end that we can answer fairly quickly?
We're just really super appreciative of having this time with you, Jasmine, for you making the time, but just for all the work that you do with PPS students and families. It's really incredible. And we truly meant what we said in the beginning, that you are often cited as the students' trusted adults, the reasons why students go to school. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. I know you all have to leave. Logistics, there's a feedback form in the chat. Here you go. Thank you. Please give feedback. We always want to improve, and I want to make sure I'm providing sessions for you all that are useful. So feedback is always welcome.